Thank you so much for joining us. The name of the workshop is How Can National Education Strategies and Policies Support Blue Education? It's an online workshop, the first in our series. This follows our launching of the framework. And I pass the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Blue Education Framework workshops. 1 month ago, we launched the Blue Education Framework. I don't know if you were present there. Here we launched this comprehensive document that will guide countries to advance education on ocean and water in a systemic way. So this webinar, we brought together speakers, experts on education frameworks on sustainability, and we discussed the value of these frameworks, how our frameworks align, and how we can use these frameworks. So the webinar recording from this session is online for you to look at our website, our community of practice. You can see there that you will find the webinar. It's very interesting to listen to. They will share the link in the chat here. So now that we've launched the framework, it's a draft document. It's a living document. We aim to refine this document together with you. Here we are today in this workshop to collect input from you and experts on the different chapters of this framework. So we will dive a bit deeper in the different parts of the framework in this series of workshops. Michaela, the next slide, please. So every month we will have a workshop together with you to tackle one of these topics here that are addressed in the framework. What we have identified as what needs to change to strengthen blue education in the country. So today we will look at the first of these areas, and that is national strategies. In every workshop, we will bring experts together who will share their experience, their perspectives on one of these areas. And today we have 4 very interesting speakers for you on the area of national strategies. So after we've done that, we will move into a more structured collection of your input on one of these areas. So we will ask for, Michaela, you can go to the next slide. What are the objectives of this workshop? So after showcasing, as I said, all these inspiring examples on national strategies and policy instruments, we will look at how national policies can steer blue education. And we will look at key enabling conditions for success, like governance structures, financing, capacity building, communication, and so on. So, and also, I think we will identify together with you some key lessons, some gaps that are or emerging practices, things we haven't thought of, everything we should take on board in this framework. So each workshop will give you first an overview of the chapter, so you get a good glance of it. We give you interesting presentations of experts that showcase their experience, and we will collect your input. So this is how we will work for the next months, and I'm very excited to start with the first of the areas, national policies. And I will give the floor to Dr. Pierre Strosser, Head of Action, Coordinator of BlueLightS, and he will tell you a bit more about this chapter. Please, Pierre.
Thank you very much, Evie. Good morning, everybody. So here a few slides to help you to dive into the draft framework chapter if you didn't have time to look at it before this workshop. It's a collective effort, so I will try to be the voice of the different people that contributed to the chapters. on national strategies. So the first element is, what do we mean by national strategies or policies? So it's a document that sets priorities and overarching goals and principles for education in different countries, most of the time to be achieved within a given time frame. So for example, by 2030 or 2035, we aim at, or we would like that the education system has evolved with potential impacts in terms of pupils, children's education or goals. And then in the national strategies, you would most of the time find elements on how you plan to achieve this goal by setting up different mechanisms, instruments, or processes that would accompany the implementation of the strategy. In terms of instrument and delivery mechanism, what strategy can offer or require, there can be elements of governance that are set, like a national working group or committee that address a specific topic, reference persons in regional education centers, sometimes some institutionalized partnerships. It can propose financing instruments for supporting the implementation of a strategy at different scales, can provide recommendation or suggest changes in human resources and capacity, whether through certified training, compulsory pedagogical time for teachers is what you find, for example, in the National Strategy for Sustainability and Citizenship Education in Greece, and many other possible changes in how to accompany teachers, for example. It can also provide elements on new knowledge, supporting, for example, research programs that will deliver knowledge and contribute to the resources that would help stakeholders to implement the national strategy at different scales. Next slides, please. Do a national strategy for Blue education exist today? No. I think that was one of the challenge that BlueLightS took. You do not find them really, or not yet, but you can find elements of the blue. When I say the blue, I mean river and ocean sustainability. You can find them in general education strategies or strategies dedicated to specific societal challenges like citizenship education or climate change education and the like. You can also find in existing strategies support to many principles or elements of pedagogy that are also central to Blue education. Here I cite only a few of them: value-based education, ethics, information literacy, which is essentials, inquiry-based or project-based learning, critical thinking, and the like. Next slide, please. In the framework work and discussions for every component of the national education system that Evie mentioned and listed above, we thought about providing guidance on how you could move Blue education up a ladder, what we call different level of maturity, on how the blue, ocean and river sustainability can be embedded into national education strategies. Here I'm not reading exactly all what is on the slides, but you can think that when you start thinking about blue in a country, some part of national education system that deals with sustainability, for example, might touch upon some topics related to land and water that might be relevant for blue education. However, the blue is not a central part of a strategy and doesn't get specific attention. As you move up in the ladder of maturity levels, you might have then a national education strategy dealing with sustainability that would give more attention in a structured manner to blue education elements, whether knowledge, whether some of the principles I raised before. And then to the last level, you would have in a country a dedicated blue education strategy that would try to make best use at all opportunities that can be offered in the education system to give some attention to the blue, shifting from traditional knowledge absorption methods to more open learning, critical thinking, for example, bringing also quite some attention to monitoring, measuring impacts of what the strategy would imply when implemented, giving attention to how the implementation of a strategy would deliver better ocean literacy for students and pupils of a given country, for example, and in the longer term of citizens in general. If you go to the next slides and then I will finish with that. For every level, there are challenges that can be faced. In level 1, you will think about non-centralized, fragmented. In level 2, you might talk about not enough blue educational resources, organized, structured. If you go to level 3 in the next slide, you could think about lack of teachers training, certified training that ensure that in a systematic manner, the blue is properly accounted for. And then in the last level, you might face challenges in implementing the blue education strategy that your country might have adopted, resistance from some of the actors that are from the informal blue education sector, for example, that would not necessarily see with a positive eye the fact that you internalize the blue in a certain way into a national strategy for the formal education system and alike. I think that's, if you get a couple of more slides, there are many questions that we have for us. As I mentioned earlier, we talk about blue education strategy. That's the central point of our BlueLightS project. And there is a question whether it should be a dedicated strategy or element of the blue internalized in other strategies related to education, like what you will hear a bit later, an education for sustainability, for example, that will give space to the blue. There is many questions about the enabling conditions once a strategy is adopted, so the strategy is implemented, making sure that it does not remain a paper strategy, but a fully operationalized strategy. We'll talk about it a bit later. And then there is a questions from BlueLightS Consortium as a whole and the one that produced the framework, which is of the maturity level. And let's say a progressive way to integrate the blue into national strategies, whether this is relevant, whether this is useful and has added value as a steering to promoting the blue in the education system, when and for whom. What you find into this chapter, you find much more, and you find much more detail on the maturity level, for example, and the challenges with examples from different countries that have helped us to design the draft document.
Thank you, Pierre, for giving us an outline of this chapter. For those who are new to the framework, please do read the framework. We have published it on our website, and there you can see this chapter. So to give you a bit more concrete examples on these national strategies, we invited for you several speakers where we think can really contribute to increasing your knowledge on what these national strategies and policies look like and how they can be linked with the ocean. To start with, we invited a speaker who is an expert in blue ocean literacy strategies and who is helping to develop in the UK a national strategy, a national blue strategy, a strategy on ocean literacy. So I would like to give the floor to Emma McKinley today to start with this, what such a blue strategy can look like on a national level. Please, Emma, I'd like to
Thank
give
you very
the floor
much,
to you.
Evie, and And thank you very much, Pierre, for that overview. And Michaela, if you can go on to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. Hi to everybody who perhaps doesn't know me. My name's Emma McKinley. I'm a marine social scientist based at Cardiff University. So as Evie said, I'm involved in the work that's happening to develop national ocean literacy strategies in England and Wales. So we're taking a broader kind of overview approach, thinking about ocean literacy, which part of that, of course, is Blue Education. There are a number of amazing people that have been involved in these processes, so I wanted to make sure that some of their names are captured on the slide, but it's very much been a collaborative effort that I'm just part of that bigger picture. Next slide, please. So for our work that we've been doing over the last few years, the real framing that we've been taking has been very much influenced by the inclusion of ocean literacy within the UN Ocean Decade over the last 5-6 years or so, and really around the kind of evolution of the concept of ocean literacy that we've seen happen in recent years. So part of that has been really framing it around some of the work that's happened around Challenge 10 for the Ocean Decade, which is kind of positioned this idea of needing to work to restore society's relationship with the ocean and really embracing those multiple values, multiple relationships, and recognizing the complexity of human-ocean relationships. And we've also then been using the 10-dimension framework for ocean literacy that I published a few years ago with colleagues Daryl Burden and Rebecca Shellock. So as I said, just really taking that very broad, evolved thinking around ocean literacy to support the work that we've been doing to develop the strategies. The first one that I'm going to come on to talk to you about is the Welsh strategy. So the next slide, please. We used the ocean literacy assessments that were carried out in the UK in 2021 and 2022 as the kind of starting point for the work that we've been doing to design the strategies over the last few years. So the 10-dimension framework that I mentioned a second ago, that was used to help us develop an assessment tool that was carried out across the whole of the UK, so all 4 countries in the UK, and we have a really amazing data set that gives us insights into those relationships and the complexities of that people have across both inland and coastal communities across all of the 4 countries. The reports have all been published, so each country has its own individual report. The Ocean Society survey that some of you might be familiar with, that has been run in the UK as well. So the Ocean Conservation Trust ran that. And then in Wales, we are currently rerunning or about to rerun the assessment to get a 2026 data set. So we're hoping that will help us to do some of that monitoring and evaluation that Pierre was talking about a few minutes ago. Next slide, please. So the work that we did in the assessment and to gather insights into people's relationships was then fed into some work that the Wales Coast and Seas Partnership were doing to develop a ministerial appointed group which highlighted and prioritised ocean literacy as one of its 3 strategic priorities. So the Wales Coast and Seas Partnership is made up of government organisations, regulatory authorities, universities, NGOs, education groups. And as a collective, we identified ocean literacy, or the need to enhance and foster ocean literacy across Wales, as one of our 3 strategic priorities. And what that meant is it gave us a really amazing platform to start to ask people across the community what they thought was important for ocean literacy going forward. We ran some workshops in 2022, so quite soon after that initial assessment of community relationships and ocean literacy across Wales was done. And it was one of the outcomes of those workshops was to identify the need for an ocean literacy vision for Wales and an ocean literacy strategy for Wales. They were like the asks from the broader community. So that led to the beginning of 2 years of really collaborative co-design work to go on to develop the strategy. That was okay. It was the next slide. I was just going to ask you for it. So in January of last year, we launched More Ní. If you could go through the slide for me, that would be great. Fabulous. Thank you. So More Ní translates as the sea and us. And as I said, this was the culmination of 2 years of co-design work where we brought together and established the Wales Ocean Literacy Coalition to collectively decide on what our mission statement was, what the vision is, and you can see it here. The vision of the strategy is that people are connected to, understand and value our coasts and seas in Wales and can make informed decisions that support a safe and sustainable relationship between them. There are a number of goals around ocean connection, ocean understanding and ocean values. Next slide, please. And underpinning those kind of goals and those overarching outcomes is are six key action areas. And again, these were co-developed through a series of co-design collective workshops. We brought everybody together and said, what do we want? What's important in a Welsh context? We used the 10 dimensions of ocean literacy thinking that I mentioned earlier to help us develop these six key action areas. So very much learned from the strategy work that had been done in Canada as well. So we really kind of tried to build on their experience and their expertise, where they developed 9 key action areas for the Canadian strategy. We didn't have 9, we've got 6. And these draw on those 10 dimensions. So we have things like access and experience, ocean literate policy, really recognizing the need to take a whole system, whole policy portfolio approach to understanding and embracing ocean literacy. And I guess that kind of speaks to that question around how you integrate the blue across different areas. Knowledge and skills was really crucial, and that's where education very much sits. Communities and culture, so Welsh language and culture were very much prioritised in the conversations, and then building the capacity and building the network to deliver this. Could you do the next button, please, Michaela? Thank you. To help support the delivery of these 6 action areas, there are outcomes and objectives are set out in the strategy, and suggested actions that people could contribute to or could think about how their project could help deliver the goals of the strategy. I think it's important to highlight that this is a co-owned strategy, and it's not owned by government. It is something that is a collectively owned and implemented strategy, which has its own challenges in terms of funding and resourcing. And if you come to the next slide, please. We have been really active since the launch of last year. So we have a Welsh Ocean Literacy Coalition coordinator, Rhys Halstead, who's supported by the North Wales Wildlife Trust. And they've been amazing to actually give us that capacity. We got a bit of funding from some government funding that was available to start to deliver against the goals of the strategy. So Rhys coordinated the organisation of 2 festivals held in North and South Wales last spring, and they contributed to the action areas of access and experience, knowledge and skills, and community and culture. Next slide, please. And then we've also been working to build capacity. So we have the coalition that we meet every quarter, the steering group that I sit on, we meet every 6 weeks. We've had really great support in Welsh Government through the Senedd. So our Deputy First Minister has been a real champion to support the strategy. And there's been a fund launched recently to build further capacity around Wales, supported by Welsh Government, to have coastal coordinators, so people in place who will work to build capacity within coastal communities to ensure that they can feed into decision making and support coastal governance going forward. Next slide, please. Off the back of the work that we've been doing in Wales, we've actually also been working to develop a strategy in England, and I'm working really closely with Nicola Bridge from the Ocean Conservation Trust to co-lead the co-design, lots of co's, of an ocean literacy strategy in England. And this was first started as part of the Diverse Marine Values Project, which came to an end at the end of 2025, and we're continuing that going forward. Next slide, please. Since spring of last year, so over the last year, we've run 11 co-design workshops and engaged over 200 people from across England, including inland councils and inland communities, to start that co-design process. We've had so many really amazing workshop sessions to ask about what's a priority, what's a value. Next slide, please. And some of the key things that I think it's worth just mentioning, I think, as I come to an end, is just that some of the co-identified principles that we've really started to build into our design process has been that a national strategy is what we're aiming for, to allow us to bring in inland communities who perhaps feel that they have been disengaged from coastal conversations, sectors that are perhaps not always included in coastal conversations. So really making sure that it's inclusive of both inland and coastal. And I think probably the most important message for this session is that although the concept of ocean literacy has evolved, that education really remains key. And so we're really working to think about how we can unlock those entry points to support the national curriculum, but also embrace those ideas of lifelong learning. And so I think that's something that we're really trying to integrate into our thinking. I'm going to ask you to skip on one slide, please, because I know I'm out of time. So just, I suppose that the main thing is that we're very much in a work in progress for the English strategy. If you're interested in looking at the Welsh strategy, you can see it here, and I can send it to Evie and Pierre. And if you're interested in finding out more about the English strategy, then please do feel free to email me. Thank you. I'm here for questions, and I can stay now. My meeting's been moved, so I can stay for the whole session.
Thank you very much, Emma. It's very interesting to see this developing. And incredible amount of post-its, by the way.
So many post-its, and some of them have multiple points on the post-its.
Yes, indeed. I see there's a hand. Pierre, you raised your hand.
I understood from Emma that you raise a certain number of conditions, like you need a coordinator at some point to give life to a strategy. You need a network of reference people. You need strong political support, or strong political support is very useful. So that's what is, from your perspective, the critical enabling condition that is helping you today to deliver? Maybe if you could give a couple of elements, and one related to financing, because you said that financing was an issue.
Yeah.
Is how you could shed a bit of light. And then the last point I made is, in the framework that we have written so far, we talk about national strategy, but we don't really say whether they are bottom up or top down. So I think we should give a bit more element on the process that is leading to the strategy, because that has an impact on the capacity to implement later on.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. They're great. So I've tried to write them down. I'll try to capture them all. I'm going to go with finance first, because I think it's probably the easiest one in a way to respond to. So for both the English and the Welsh processes, and actually it's worth mentioning that Scotland's undergoing a process to support a strategy at the moment as well. For both, we had small pockets of money, little pots. So I was able to get a little bit of money through a project that was coming to an end, and we had a no-cost extension. So we were able to have a bit of money for running some workshops. The Welsh strategy work, we were able to get a bit of money from a coastal coordinating fund that allowed us to run the workshops initially. And then we applied for money to, well, we didn't, Natural Resources Wales managed to apply for money to support Reese's role as a coordinator. So the funding has always been challenging because we don't have kind of central government funding. In Wales, we definitely have central government support, but it's not funded through central government. And some of that's intentional, I think, in that there were some concerns that if a strategy was owned by a government organization, it could actually disengage certain sectors and certain groups from being involved and thinking that it was for them. So there were some risks that we weighed up to decide that actually it would be better to be a collective piece. And that led to the establishment of the Welsh Ocean Literacy Coalition. And we've done similar in Scotland and England. So Scotland have a coalition that's been established. We're trying to avoid using the word coalition in England. So we've got a community of practice at the moment, just because there are loads of coalitions, but a network, a group that are willing to come together, particularly because so much of it is voluntary and there isn't resource for people's time. So yeah, establishing that group of champions, I suppose, that are willing to lend their time to be involved. And we've really had incredible response in England. And I would say that kind of answers the finance and perhaps the enabling conditions. That you do need that interest and momentum. I don't think we would have had this interest and momentum 5 years ago. I think if I'd tried to do the same thing 5 or so years ago, I don't think I would have had 11 workshops and 200 people engaged in a year. And we still, we ran one, we ran a set of workshops at the beginning of this month, and there were 90 people registered for those workshops. And it's just amazing to see that input. So I think definitely having that community has been really valuable. I think we've tried to learn from what we didn't do so well in Wales. And one of the things was, because we didn't have resource necessarily for people's time, there tended to be quite long gaps between sessions. And so what we've tried to do in the English approach is do quite regular feedback sessions. So we have, even if they're just hour-long or 90-minute virtual sessions, where we just update people and tell them where Nick and I have gotten to or what the next phase is. We've tried to do a bit of a mix of that, as well as the more in-depth co-design sessions. So having that regular communication, I think, has been really appreciated. And so the critical enabling question, yeah, I think the community and having that capacity is really valuable. And if you can get resource to have a coordinator, Rhys has been absolutely incredible in Wales. He's been unbelievable, and he's just submitted an expression of interest for a large funding bid to try and help us mobilize more resource to deliver things more across the country. So I do think if there is an opportunity to have that individual, it is amazing. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Emma, for all the tips you're giving. So if there's any other questions for Emma, please do ask them now, because Emma will need to leave
I can stay
later on in the session. So
I can stay. It's okay. I can stay. My meeting got changed.
yes. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah,
Nice
but also, yeah, please.
to have you here for the rest of the session. So if there's no urgent questions, we can move on to the next speaker, Professor Jan Lundell from the LUMA Centre, Finland. So, as you all know, Finland has a reputation of having one of the best education systems in the world. So we are very happy to hear Professor Lundell to share with us their national STEM strategy and what opportunities lie there for Blue education.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here. And first of all, let's make one thing clear. I'm a director of LUMA Centre, Finland. LUMA stands for STEM in Finnish. So now you know, whenever I say LUMA, it's STEM. So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And the LUMA Centre Finland is a research network or development network of 11 research universities. And we do have 13 regional LUMA centers around Finland, so we basically cover the whole country. The country that the blue right now is more white because water is frozen most of the time in these hours. But LUMA Centre Finland, or LUMA itself, is an old concept of over 30 years, going back 30 years. But it's the national mentality of looking at science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And LUMA is more or less a collaborative ecosystem where we work with the government, the schools, the teachers, the communities, labor unions, teacher unions, science museums, and the industry. So this is a huge nationwide ecosystem. And one of the things that came out from the work we've done so far and from this ecosystem was actually the Finnish LUMA test strategy. And here the TE was added in the implementation plan just because we want to highlight also technology. Finland doesn't have a climate change strategy. It doesn't have a blue strategy. It doesn't have a green strategy. However, the Finnish LUMA strategy, STEM strategy, is built up so that it focuses on a systemic approach. That when we talk about education, we need to address both teaching and learning, but also the governance, the planning, the curriculum development, training of teachers. And this actually fits very well to the LUMA ecosystem because as research universities, all the teachers are trained in our partner universities. So we do have a connection directly to teacher training as well the professional development projects. But the STEM strategy is not just focusing on certain subjects. It's multidisciplinary. It's focusing on everyday life and a good life of citizens in the working society. So this is already a larger concept than just STEM, which means that we need to look this in a strategic way, that how the LUMA strategy is connected with all the other strategies in the country. That means we can't just talk about the STEM, but we actually need to talk about STEAM. And when I say STEAM, the A that comes into STEM is not art only. Yes, curiosity, creativity are important, but for us, A is all sciences. So it connects STEM with all the other directions. That means we can also cover blue, green, climate change, the strategies with this one strategy because we do have the sustainability involved here. So we do work in a framework of multidisciplinary, sustainable science learning for people in the society. That means also when we start talking about the schooling, so we need to consider not only formal schooling, but also non-formal and informal schooling. So what happens inside the school walls, outside the school walls, in families, in society in general, in science museums, and so on. And this is something that we are focusing on. LUMA Centre Finland actually has a national task directly from the government to promote all education in STEM fields in formal, non-formal, and informal education. Another thing that we need to address with the strategy is attitudes in the society. So how people see different things, how they understand the value of research, how they understand the value of the surroundings, and how, for example, career possibilities and ethics comes into the picture. And this is all inbuilt in the LUMA strategy that we have. And there's an implementation plan in the strategy. By the way, this is available in English as well, so it's easily read. So you don't have to manage it in Finnish or Swedish. So if we look the Finnish schooling system, so Mika, next slide, please. If we look at the schooling system in Finland, so our curriculum is well adapted to whether it's climate change, blue, green education. Can I have the next slide, please? Just to show briefly what comes out is that the national curriculum that we have starting from preschooling to higher education actually has cross-cutting topics like sustainability, circular economy, project-based learning, different ways of incorporating different topics directly in the curriculum. And I think that this is one of the biggest issues in Finland is that the curriculum development takes care of many of the things that have been addressed in the Blue Education Framework. So there are possibilities to do this. And just an example, LUMA Centre Finland is currently running a teacher professional development program called Water Economics, which combines mathematics, economics, and the blue in one big training program. So that's another way to provide the teachers the skills and actually teaching materials and experiences on the blue economy. Also, the water or blue is very important in Finland for the society, which means that when we talk about context-based, phenomenon-based education, it goes directly into the curricula that we have in schools, which means the teachers can use these things directly in their teaching. If we go further in the slides, so if we look for the challenges, and this is always the interesting thing. We know how to do things. We know what we are having in schools at the moment. We know that teacher training is especially important for developing the education. And we know that training teachers is not enough, but we need to have a constant support for them all the time with materials, with the training programs. But also what we need is a pedagogically solid educational material. Also, this leads to the fact that even though we have this curriculum development done as part of the strategy based on the national different strategies, the curriculum overload is an issue. So how do we get all the transversal themes inside the curriculum? And because in Finland, there is a huge autonomy on the school level and teacher level on what to do and how to do things. So it needs to be well defined how things go into the curriculum. Said that, it's a fact that if we look at the curriculum development, if we don't have these issues in the curriculum, they never will go into the school activities. However, there is the possibility to do collaborative projects with the science museums, different events, different educational societies. Yes, we can do that. But in order to be sustainable, that means it's a long-standing application. So we need to get that inside the structure. That means the curriculum and in the normal educational days. Then a challenge for Blue education is also the uneven local capacity. So we do have in Finland a lot of small schools, and the resources, the possibilities to do things are different from maybe a bigger schools. On the other hand, small schools might be more agile to take up things that are in their local surrounding, and by that creating new possibilities for learning and education. When we talk about resources and time limitations, that's always there. So we need to embed things in the existing curriculum, existing frameworks of school days, school programs. And that's why in Finland, we do have a curriculum developed in a way that there is project work possibilities, there are multidisciplinary activities possible. And this resolves many of those issues. And in Finland, outdoor learning is actually not a real big problem, because that is something that we are doing all the time. For example, next summer, there's a huge educational conference in Finland called Ulos Ut Out. So how to do education in outdoor surroundings. Then there is the policy landscape. So there are a lot of strategies, a lot of policy papers, and how do those combine into classroom practice? The only way is to get things into the curriculum and then into teacher training, and from teacher training it goes into the schools. Teacher training is the key for all educational development, whether it's teachers in school or teachers in training. And what we know, without the personal experience, the teachers won't adapt anything in their own classes, own teaching. So they need to have a hands-on, first-hand experience with new things. And when we talk about the national policy mandate, is there really a need for a blue strategy in Finland? My first impression is no, because we can adopt things from different strategies existing already, use the STEM strategy as a basis, go for a multidisciplinary, sustainable way, and that incorporates also the blue. Here, I'm also stressing that we could incorporate the green or climate change or any of the new how I would say big issues, global issues that affects the learning, teaching, and actually the society in large. So we can do all this by having a systemic approach when we look at the education, how to develop the education, and just solve the issues that comes from resources, time, the skills, the competences, because the final product, it's bad to say that it's a final product, but we want the society to be affected by the education. We want the future policymakers to be affected. We need people to understand the value of blue as well as green or climate change. So that's the things, those are the things that come out from the STEM strategy. We want to look on issues in a sustainable way, multidisciplinary way, in a systemic way, and with that, we can tackle also the blue educational framework that we are talking about. Thank you. That's my 8 minutes, I hope.
Yes, thank you very much for mapping out the opportunities and the challenges on Blue Education and for sharing your answer to Pierre's question. Should we see it as a separate strategy or integrate it in existing strategies? So, yeah, putting ocean and water topics as learning contexts and all these things that you're developing, yeah, is certainly a good way forward. Pierre, you have any reactions?
No. I have many, but we can address them a bit later into the panel discussion also. I think effectively many thanks, Jan. Very useful and
Okay, so now we can move forward. The next speaker, Ms. Julie Boulet from the Ministry of Regional Planning and Ecological Transition. So France has the most interesting Blue School network, as you know or might not know. It's a network of more than 400 schools that manage a part of a marine protective area. And this network, it exists thanks to national strategies and policies, and we are very eager to hear the perspective of Ms. Julie Boulet on biodiversity education. Please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this session. I'm here also with Louise Bigot, who works in National Office for Biodiversity, which is a state agency, an agency from the Ministry of Environment. So, Louise, please feel free to maybe add compliments to my speech today. I'm about to tell you about the Education for Sustainable Development and Sustainable Lifestyles policy, which is a large policy for the French Ministry of Environment with a wider integration in the ministry's action. So maybe you can pass the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So as a matter of fact, lifelong education is one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So we adopt this approach for every sustainable development education. And sustainable education is in particular one of the 6 pillars main pillars of the French action plan for this agenda, as I try to translate you in the slide. And therefore, sustainable development education is not a stand-alone policy, as in Finland, in France, but is really a part of sectorial policies, which are led by the Ministry of Ecological Transition. And I put you some example here in the slide. For example, for the National Strategy for Biodiversity, education for biodiversity is one main pillar out of 4, which is called Stimulate and Rally Every Stakeholder, and which contain about 20 actions on citizen education all along life. Also, in the National Plan for One Health, you have one pillar out of 4, which is called to be informed and trained about environment situation and right moves for people health and health of ecosystems. And it's also included in a National Plan for Climate Adaptation, for example, or low carbon strategy, or again in national planification for ecological transition with a lifestyles transition, and a work which is led at the moment to make the link education, sustainable development education to the regional action plan that are implemented locally. And in the next slide, I presented how we are organized for the governance of this policy. Because as this policy is not a standalone policy, it's led by every ministry's services, carrying its proper sectorial policies, and within ecological ministry, it's carried by every service involved in this education for sustainable development. For instance, you have the general desk, general secretary of the ministry, which supports NGOs. We have support actions for sustainable development education, and every policy department that carry its proper policy, for example, by biodiversity or air quality or health and environment, also carry action and policy for education. And the General Commission for Sustainable Development, in which I work, is in charge for the cross-cutting issues and maintaining global consistency for all sustainable development education. This action and this policy is led with strong links with the local department, local services, who implement the same guidances and local policies in regional plans, and also with state agencies as the Environment Agency or French Office for Biodiversity, or again water agencies, which also implement these educational services. If you press the next button, please, you will see that we work with strong links as well with National Education Ministry for primary school to high school, and also with non-formal education with Ministry for Youth and Sports. And this link helps us to implement the national policy in every scopes of educational systems, formal and non-formal, as in Finland as well. And these ministries are also in links with the proper local services, schools, and networks of local agencies. And secondarily, we also are in links with ministries of culture and agriculture. We also have, you can press next button, please. We also have a policy for this education in their proper policies. So you have above at the upper side of the slide the national level, and at a regional level, if you again press the next button, you can see that in some region we have dedicated governance which reunite and which enable every actors to lead a global policy and a cross-cutting policy at a local level. In the next slide, I detailed how it's led in every scope and with every stakeholders. So at school, we have programs for this education from kindergarten, preschool to higher education after the baccalaureate in France. Indeed, it's mandatory. It's written in the National Educational Code, and it's mandatory all along the curriculum in formal education. And we have a network of labeled institutes named E3D for Educational Institute with Sustainable Approach in the running of the institute as in the learning contents. And we also have eco-delegates, one eco-delegate in every secondary and high school establishment, and also it's also optional in primary school, but it's also possible in primary school. We also have academic missions for sustainable development education in every educational district that are named academy in France, if you know how we are organized, with a dedicated governance as well. And teachers are trained, and we also support dedicated programs like the marine and land educative areas that maybe you know with National Office for Biodiversity. And we also have programs. So at school, we, of course, work with the Ministry for National Education System. And we also work with NGOs for education outside school and for everyone by integrating large citizen mobilization in national and regional policies, and also representation of the NGOs and this citizen mobilization in the conception of environmental policies. And therefore, we have partnerships in educational governance and networking with the NGOs at a national and local level. Partnership, we can have operational forms and also financial aims. And we also support and encourage local authorities to implement these policies in their proper local policies for environment, and integrate the local governments on sustainable development education. So I will be maybe short and like the room for direct answers to question. But in the next slide, I made a focus on Blue education and how we can lead this policy in particular, and maybe have recommendations. So as we talk about Blue education, we recommend to speak about the immediate environment of people to make them feel concerned and understand why it's important to preserve water resource and how to protect it. And for that, we recommend to work with all actors and talk to all stakeholders in educational system, formal and non-formal, but with also local authorities, natural spaces managers, NGOs, to really educate in every area and where people is and in their everyday life. Talk to all stakeholders because water is a shared resource and people need exemplarity. So with citizens, but also with farmers, businesses, tourism industry, for instance, the golf area or swimming area managers, etc. And the main recommendation is to lead a cross-cutting and complex approach for Blue education and make sure that people learn connections between water issues and every sustainable development stakes to really understand how it can be linked and how they can implement the right moves and in their everyday life. So I had to be short, but let's make the room for questions if you're interested for further details.
Yeah, many thanks, Ms. Boulet. Pierre?
Yeah, I'd one comment and one question. One comment is from the three presentations so far, that in the framework, whatever we write, we need to give much more attention to the governance and the organization issues, because in all presentation you have touched it, and we show that there are choices. So thanks for that. We will come back to you with some need for examples. And the question was, why is a strategy not a common strategy between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Ecology? Because it could be seen as a co-hosted strategy at a national level. And then when you present it from the Ministry of Ecology with partnership with the Ministry of Education. Can you explain the reason why you ended up with this choice?
There is no common strategy for education for sustainable development in general in every ministries. So every ministry implements this policy in its proper sectoral policy. I don't know how I can say that. So the policy of education, of national education, is to lead the educational system, and they integrate the sustainable development in their policy, and as well for every ministry. And actually, we have a very strong partnership to lead the same policy and policies which are which have a global consistency, but we have no document on national policy for education or sustainable education, so we can't have this common strategy. But we have very strong links between us, and we used to have global framework with Ministry of National Education, but it was overall to implement governance in the local districts, and now this governance is in place and run well. So we don't have the need anymore for this framework. So it's really about everyday links between services, actually. And locally, you have, as I said on the third slide, locally you have governance, which is rebuilding actually, because they used to exist before, and they had a lack of running lastly, but they are rebuilding actually to have a dedicated governance for maintaining this consistency locally. Yes, Louise, maybe you want to add something.
Yeah, just maybe I wanted to add something very quickly also on the strong links between sustainable education and Blue education in France, and the fact that Blue education is really, as you said, is really embedded in sustainable education policies and management. And us at the French Biodiversity Agency, we are working closely and also with Julie, with the Ministry for Education, and the person in charge of sustainable education is also in charge of Blue education, and is managing different projects on Blue education there. And I would add that Blue education has been given maybe also a special focus last year in France, because there, as you may know, France organized UNOC, and so we had this Year of the Sea. So there was this focus on Blue education, but maybe in comparison to other countries, we don't have this special Blue education strategy. And it's not, I don't know, but I don't think it's written in the strategies you spoke about. It's not directly written that we should have a focus on Blue education, or there is no special goals on Blue education. Maybe for water agencies, but I'm not sure about that.
Water agencies have some, I think. Maybe you have also some measures and action in the National Biodiversity Plan and Strategy, because it also addresses water issues. And as well, we are now working for national water conferences, as I can translate them. And we ask every, how can we say, catchment area? Do you understand this term? Is it the right term? Yes. To work on how we can better manage the water resource in multiple subjects and themes. And you have the issue for citizen mobilization, and we are working on it at the moment. So maybe in this policy for water, we will have a special recommendation and dedicated orientation as well.
Many thanks. I'm sure it will come up later in our discussion. So let's move further. So we zoomed in at the UK level, Finland, France, to these national policies that are linked to Blue education. And now we will end with a different perspective on education policies from the OECD. So I would like to give the floor to Dr. Stéfan Vincent-Lancrin, please.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I'm not at all an expert of blue education or ocean education. And so I'm going to just, give you some feedbacks or insights based on, my work on innovation and actually how you go from a strategy towards actual change. In case I forget, I just wanted to say one of the things that I think I like very much in your framework is actually the levels and the different ways of implementing and the different level of aspiration of it. And I think you actually already have very good structure in it. And a lot of what I'm going to say is just echoing what the others have done, but in a more national specific way. Let me just start by saying that, well, this is something that is very difficult to do, so actually implementing a strategy, any given one. It's not easy to have one in the first place, and you need to, but when you go from having one to implementing one, it's a very difficult thing. One of the things I've been working on in the past decade is actually the implementation of competency-based curricula. And that's something that OECD countries have had for 20, 30 years, that's, and when I'm asking them, so how is it going? Usually the answer is it's too early to say. We don't know yet because we're still working on it. And so it's just to give you an idea of the kind of complexity, and part of it is really because in the case of education you have so many people to convince and so much alignment to try to create, and actually that's really one of the very difficult thing. So I think the first step, which is very important and that you have and that we could see in the example that we had, is actually to have an explicit strategy so that people know what is expected. One of the difficult thing with the strategies is that, you have a lot of competing strategies as well, so one of the big things that we are working on and that many countries are working on is what is the strategy for AI in education, for example, and before that you had so it's about AI literacy, like we talk about, ocean literacy. And so we have to think of that. And what I would say the easier hook for formal education is obviously to try to change the curriculum, but as Jan mentioned, it is actually not so easy to do. So I think that the idea of integrating some of these ideas in the existing one is actually the easier way of doing it. And also actually putting an emphasis on primary education. Primary education is actually when it comes to science, that's the easiest to actually try to change, because the teachers have much more leeway in terms of what they're doing. It's not as crowded, and actually they can do interdisciplinary work in much easier way than many of the other ones. But of course, informal education or non-formal education is important as well, and so that could be linked to different types of projects, visits, and supplemented with that. That's the kind of the easy way of doing it without changing too much in the curriculum, and so but still making people more sensitized to the issues, and so hoping to start with kind of more awareness raising or making people much more aware. The second aspect is actually to provide people with incentives. That's a tricky one. So incentives in the education system usually come from different things. You've mentioned already in the framework the financing part of it, but perhaps what I haven't heard yet is how you actually deal with that in examinations. That's something that actually drives a lot of the education systems. To a lesser extent, national assessments, something that almost all OECD countries now have, they are low stake, but nonetheless, they give actually the system some insights of what the policymakers really believe is important, so when you actually include these kind of dimensions into it. And last but not least, for countries who do have such institutions, working a little bit with the inspectorate as well, the one giving feedback to either teachers or schools in terms of what they should be doing, have they covered what was intended or not. So these actors are tricky ones because they don't like to change a lot of what they do. But it's very important to engage with them to actually, if you want to have a discussion. This is important for alignment because you want your assessment to be aligned with the teaching and learning of the students, but for the incentives. And last but not least, you've mentioned pupils and students. Working with higher education is essential as well because, in fact, especially the upper secondary phase of schooling almost everywhere is very much looking toward what is expected in higher education. And so if in the, let's say, STEM fields, people do not really care about people knowing anything about blue education, then it's not going to work, and so you really also have to work with these stakeholders. Third element, which is very important, is to provide teachers and stakeholders with tools, and that's something that you do. That's something that you've mentioned in different ways in the examples that were given today. And so here is example of good lesson plans or the pedagogical ways of integrating that even within the current curriculum, and of delivering it. It is possibly providing school with ways of organizing projects or festivals around something that will actually bring in the community on how to do all these things. Is providing examples of assessment tasks and how you can actually use the blue education elements in the assessment evaluation of the current curricula. So that's one aspect, but of course you have the professional development of teachers, which is essential. And here, we can go to things which are more or less formal, and it can come as, the French example provided, and it's something which is very much used for digital education, of having teacher champions, typically, who are teacher colleagues who spread information about how to integrate these things and what kind of tools to use to do it, and actually keep the community of practice active. That's actually the most difficult. We always say we want people, teachers to learn in a professional learning community, in a community of practice. But if you try to animate one, it's so much work. It is, because you always need to post new things to get people engaged. And so you need people who are actually having time to do these kind of things and who are dedicated. And doing it at the school level may be too much, but doing it at the regional level, as some countries have done for digital education, for example, may be one of the ways forward. It's also about working with teacher training institutions. So, who are doing the STEM and how they can actually integrate, try to work with them on enriching their training offering so that interested teachers can actually do that. You have to keep in mind this is a limited option, because in most countries, once you are an in-service teacher, you choose what teacher training you want to do. You usually don't have or very little mandatory teacher training. You if it's mandatory, it just means that you need to do a few hours of training. But of course, you choose what you want to do. But providing a broader offering and working with teacher trainers to make this happen is a very also important way forward. And perhaps last but not least, it could also go, we working with the early adopters, those who are interested, and having actually, you've mentioned the funding to finance some kind of research projects, but having these innovation projects of practice engaged research or active action research kind of projects. And the reason is that actually this, we usually say that we need to provide teacher training because we are trying to innovate, and so the teacher training follows the innovation, and that's what we want to do. Well, what we often forget is that actually the innovation is also the teacher training. And so if you actually make everyone a little bit incompetent in what they're trying to do, then actually if there is an interest, you create actually the conditions for people to learn and work together and have these communities of practice and do these things. It requires a little bit of funding, but it's not huge in terms of, the time that is required. And it really helps to mobilize those who are already the most motivated in doing that, acknowledging that when you try to scale it, it's actually much, much more difficult, because people have so many other things to do. But if you have strong innovators and people get excited, actually this help to spread the innovations through the system. If you think of many of the innovations that we had that people usually say that they have failed, let's say, Montessori, or if you look more carefully, they haven't failed, it's more like, they haven't become the signature pedagogy of the system, but they are actually part of the mainstream. And so if we keep in mind that pedagogy and education is a lot of small activity that people do, and so sometimes they go out to museums, sometimes they do some, physical education, they do a little bit of lecturing, another day they do a project, another time. So, the question is, how do we actually make these things part of the portfolio of everyone, rather than trying to change everything and make it look like, something very central. You have the blue schools, which can actually be the centers where people are really motivated, can actually do these kind of things. But the question is, how do we spread these ideas throughout the system without necessarily changing everything? And last but not least is actually trying to monitor, so as I said, I very much like your scale of where are we at different levels of implementation. Maybe the shell will have to be kind of refined, but the question is, how do we monitor progress, and do we know where we're at on these elements or where people are? As you know, there are a few tools like what the European Commission has done with the school surveys that they have for digital education, for example. What's the name? It's currently it will come back to me. But they do it especially for digital education, for example, and you could imagine that the same thing is being done for Blue education in terms of how people are sensitized, and it's a kind of self-reflection tool for schools that people have. But of course, the big question is who is in charge. So at the OECD, and I hear this is perhaps a tendency, in the community, we like call of government strategies. Everyone should be involved and everyone should do everything. Well, yeah, I write that too from time to time. But actually, it's also good to have someone responsible for the things, and so if you think of the monitoring, so having a lead and others working with them is actually a good thing to have, and sometimes I think it's good to have a good division of labor and not just tell everyone that you're all responsible for everything, and because that's a very good way for nothing to happen at the end of the day. So that's kind of my reflections for you, and probably I've already spoken, my time. So thank you, and great to see these things progressing, and also actually to learn about what's going on in all the different countries.
Yeah, many thanks for your feedback and for contributing to this framework. Pierre.
I have a practical question, and I have a more questions for Stéfan. The practical question is that we have afterwards a small collective discussion with a Padlet. So I suggest, if everybody is fine, we will start it. Maybe we are 5-10 minutes after the end time, and then people can continue to fill it after the workshops. I think that's the easiest. And then the question to Stéfan was about the Montessori example. and how we can then reflect on it on the maturity levels. Because in the way we have designed maturity levels is that the higher level is that a country has an education strategy that is on blue education. But if you follow the Montessori example, the higher level can also be that there is no blue education strategy, but that you have successfully internalized it everywhere else. So it is not there. So maybe we have to readapt a bit this maturity level, showing that there is different possible paths to feel that we are successful. I don't know if you have any reaction on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, I think you have to distinguish between the clear objective and the practices. And so you have actually to try to identify the practices. And in some cases, you don't need a strategy because the practices are already there, So that's, I remember I was asking some colleagues in the Nordic countries about the access to digital education tools and what is their equity strategy. And then they were saying, well, we don't really have an equity policy. I say, well, so how different is it across your different municipalities? And they say, oh, there is very little difference. So in that case, perhaps you don't need one. That's kind of if everyone is already doing more or less the same. That's. But I think that the practices are really what matters at the end of the day if you want to see what's going on the ground. Usually, you need to have the vision and the strategy for the practices to happen and for people to feel authorized to implement these practices. But what you want to monitor when you want to monitor your progress are more the practices and what people say, I would say.
And there is a question from Julie.
Yes, not very question, but more a comment, because I'm totally in line with you, Stéfan. Because in France, with our example of non-leading service on this strategy, things are done all over the country, mostly with NGOs, which are very active in this field. But as you said, we have a lack of monitoring this national approach, policy, strategy, which don't exist as well, which doesn't exist as a national strategy. So we have a lack of vision, and also it's a challenge for us to have financial resources for this strategy, as it's not we have no dedicated financial program for this theme and these issues. So mainly for the support of associations who works in this field, it can be a difficulty. But for the educational system, formal educational system, it's less a difficulty because they have their own programs and their own programs of sustainable development education with human resources, with academic missions, and with human resources and technical resources behind. And it's also included in the training program of the teachers. So it's less a difficulty, but it is a difficulty for every action out of schools with NGOs mainly. Sure. But things are done.
We looked at the training program in France for teachers. You don't find, let's say, a massive amount of blue, let's say. Yeah, it's very, very scanty, very, very marginal. And then I take the point that what you said, Stéfan, okay, maybe the strategy, the only or one of the role is to give the vision and to give the legitimacy. But because if you don't have a strategy, then what do you really monitor and evaluate? Then you're slightly stuck because there is no object that you really can look at in a more formalized way. Because when you do monitoring evaluation, you still have to compare it to some set targets, objectives, or something that was planned. And I see Emma wants to add something.
Thanks, Pierre. Yeah, I guess it was just that comment that you made right at the very end about the legitimacy is we've definitely found with the wealth strategy, but also the conversations that we've been having with the why do we want an ocean literacy strategy for England, that validation and that feeling of, look, these things are really important, they should be a priority. We've had a lot of conversations about recognizing the really great practice that already exists, that there are things that are being done. But our hope, I think, is that by having a strategy or a something that those organizations can reference and cite and saying, look, if we get this funding to do X, Y, and Z, we're contributing directly to this priority that has been identified by these experts in this area. And so that validation and weight behind things that I think historically have been a nice to have, or they've been a bit fluffy or not considered quite as important, when we know how important engaging audiences around blue topics is. And of course lots of others, but it was that idea of validity and the raising the profile of work that I think the strategy has helped us have in Wales. I think a bit similar to what I said earlier, that I don't think we would have had a situation where the Deputy First Minister would have been saying in Senate conversations, so in government conversations, about particular individual initiatives related to ocean topics if there hadn't been such momentum around the strategy that kind of brought them to the front of his viewpoint then. So yeah, I just think that's definitely been a benefit of the work that we've done on the strategy.
Thanks a lot. Maybe we move to the next slides, just to introduce at least Michaela, if you can bring back the shared PowerPoint. We try not to be long because we are 3 minutes over time, and we didn't give you a coffee break, which is sorry for us. Yeah, maybe a bit before the slides, because I need to explain what is in the Padlet. Yeah. So we set a Padlet. I don't know if you know what a Padlet is. It's a small shared digital place where you can put ideas. So we have 4 questions that we ask. The first one, is the reference in a national strategy a must for Blue Education? So it goes back to what Emma just said. Why and why not is it reference? What needs to be in a national strategy so it really helps? Because we heard from 3-4 speakers different elements that could be in. The third one is an easy one. We talked about it, enabling conditions. I think everybody talked about it in one way or another, to ensure a national strategy delivers. And then the last one is some thoughts about the maturity level and the ladder that we have in. And the idea we had was trying to capture progression. And then as Stéfan said, but then you need to make sure you can monitor and you can set where you are exactly if you want to move to the next level. So is it really useful? What is the added value? Go to the next slide, and Michaela. There is a Padlet. The link was shared into the chat. There is a QR code you can catch. And then if you move to the next slide, and then we can come back to this one, you will find the Padlet that looks like this. That's what you find online. So my request, or our request, would be please go to the Padlet. You can start going to it now. You can click on some plus, and you can put ideas and answers to these different questions. So if you can maybe I can share the real Padlet, and then we can then spend maybe 2-3 minutes just to go through it, and then we can make the closing of this workshop. So this is the real Padlet. So you can click here on the plus, like you see the mouse doing, and you can put some ideas. So we take 5 minutes. Please put a couple of first ideas and continue after the workshop. This is essential also for us to get a bit of evidence, experience beyond the 4 speakers that were with us and that took a bit of time to prepare slides and to support our conversation. Any question on the Padlet or any comments you want to make? You can also just speak. When you heard now the 4 interventions, what are key issues or new ideas that emerge about national strategies in bracket for blue education or for supporting or for mainstreaming the blue into the education system? Is any things you want to share? Raise your hand, take the floor, and feel the Padlet at the same time.
Pierre, for how long will the Padlet be open to fill in the people are asking in the chat?
Yeah, we can leave it open up to the end of the week. What is important is that it is done before we get our small debriefing meeting with the speakers and us to say, from all what we heard, what people shared, this is how we are going to bring the specific chapters of the framework forward. So it has more added value. And in the Padlet, similar to the chat, put hyperlinks to websites or to documents that you feel are essential. Like if in your country there is a national strategy for something that look like relevant for blue education, and you saw different ones. Julie presented education for sustainability. Jan presented STEM. Emma presented ocean literacy. So there are different entry points. And in all these entry points, we can learn something that is relevant for strategies for blue education. Now, let's say, because some of the enabling conditions might be exactly the same. Michaela, the last few slides here for Lucia.
Yes, thank you, Pierre. Yeah, we are coming very to the end of this very great session. Thanks a lot, everybody, for speaking, joining, contributing to this first workshop. It was greatly, truly inspiring and engaging discussion, but it shouldn't stop here, as Pierre and Evie mentioned, because this was just the beginning of the workshop series, because 3 more sessions are coming up. On the left side, on the right side, you can see the upcoming days. And so we really encourage you to save these days in your calendar, as we're gonna again bring great speakers to these workshops, and they're gonna discuss different topics and themes regarding the framework, for example, curriculums, educational resources, professional development, or teacher trainings. And my second message to you, to all, is to please register to the Blue Education platform if you haven't. This is a community of practice of the BlueLightS projects, where we really would like to bring together everybody who is already working in blue education or who is interested to enhance the blue education. You can scan this QR code with your mobile, or just simply type bluelights.eu to your browser and register to this platform. The registration is very quick and easy, and then you can access all the contents, all the contacts, materials, what the project has gathered so far. And please make sure to join the Blue Education Framework group. This is a newly launched group for discussions, exchanges, and to keep you informed about the upcoming news regarding the framework. With that said, I might give the floor back to you, Pierre, to Evie, to close the session officially.
No,
Thank you.
I think it was the official closing. It was used. So it was great. And just to say many, many thanks to Julie, Emma, Jan, and Stéfan for being with us and for sharing their experiences. I think very useful. We'll try to see how best to integrate what you presented into the next version of the framework. And please go to the Padlet before the end of the week.
Many thanks to you all for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Next time.